neoliberal and individualistic society has taught us is that we are responsible for everything that happens to us. So if you're an activist and you're tired, that's your responsibility. It's because you don't rest, or it's because you care too much, or because, there's so many ways to make this an individual's problem. Actually, it is not an individual's problem. It's a question of structure. It's a question of how a group is designed, who's doing what, how do you define your goals? Are your goals achievable with the amount of resources that you have today? Are you the right person to do that? Who should you work with to be able to do that? All these questions are organizing questions, and if you think about it, they are the only way to be healthy. But I don't want to diminish what I'm really trying to do in the book is that I got a bit frustrated of conversation that were like, oh no, it's only systemic. It's systemic. There's nothing we can do. This person is behaving in a bad way, but it's systemic. And on the other side, you have this kind of very individual, the problem is this person is not a great person, when actually this person is existing within a group of people, within a society, within a system that also brings them to behave in a certain way. And so with the book, I really wanted to reconcile both and say that, of course, there are system and there are structure, and this is what we have control over, but there is also how we show up as individuals with our history, with our background, with our trauma, and with everything that we bring with us just as a human being when we come into a group that challenge also those structures. So those structures should be made also to incorporate the reality of an individual when they want to join a group and they come with a lot of baggage. So for me, I think it's really important, if we want to talk about burnout, and not only in activism, that we reconcile the individuals and the collective, the emotional and the structural, and that all, both sides need to be taken into account for us to find solutions that work.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Sarah Durieux, author of the book Activism at All Costs. This episode opens a line. So usually I do the line of podcasts called Affectively, but there's another one that we're starting with, this one that is in the intersection, which is this is political. The work that we've been doing, I think, has high political value and relevance, especially for the moments that we are living right now. We need to organize, but how do we do it? And I think we can take a lot of the learnings that we have and put them more in the public sphere and support each other in finding good ways of organizing and move forward and fight for our rights and get to that future we talked to. We'll see with Sarah, in which we want better air, better food, healthy relationships, we want a bright future and a future full of possibility for our kids and grandchildren. And this goes through the capacity of being able to organize and fight for this future and live it, I think, as well in our organizing settings. So this is political. The work we do is political and is so important. And it also has to do with effectively, because in order to do that, we need to invite more emotion. How do we organize with emotion? How do we include it in how we are, not only as individual human beings, but with each other, and bring it in our culture to build that future we want. So specifically, Sarah talks about these different symptoms of domination cultures. She names some of them in the interview. So power dynamics, preventing people from joining social movements because they're based on, participation is based on privilege. The competition between social movements, a classic one. I've been hearing about it for the past 10 years, and it's used as let's say it's a symptom, but it's also often used as an excuse. She talks about that, the role of trauma, the sacrifice for the cause, which is a classic one that, we are made to think that we need to sacrifice ourselves and that what we want to achieve goes over our health and over our lives. The sense of urgency, the illusion of rationalization is linked to quantifying everything and taking out everything that's more qualitative, etc., etc. So Sarah really manages to talk about these huge structural topics and then to break them down in practices for activist groups. And I would just encourage you to have a look at the book. It's in French at the moment. Hopefully it will be soon available in English, and we can all benefit from that. Enjoy the chat. Welcome to another episode of The How. I'm very, very thrilled to have Sarah Durieux with me for this episode. Hi, Sarah. We'll be having a conversation that, very much looking forward to it. Let me introduce you, Sarah, briefly, and I'll give her the word so that she can do it herself. I would say that Sarah is a specialist in citizen mobilization, really an expert, has loads of experience. We'll talk about some of those in a moment. And let's say from the recent formal roles from the past, that she's been co-director of the Multitudes Foundation and executive director for Change.org, which is the world's largest online petitions platform. She's authored 2 books, both in French: Change the World, a guide for activists to retake power, and I translated the other one, Activism at All Costs. And that's the book we're going to focus on for today's interview, which is, for me, an intersection between seeing the world in another way or moving away from domination patterns based on the world of activism. And how can we build? What is the vision, actually? That's one of the questions I'm going to ask you later. The vision for activism that we would want to have, a desirable one. And then I just wanted to mention also that she has taken part in at least 3 goosebumps moment of recent history that I'm really amazed by. That she was one of the mobilizers that supported the win of the left during the 2024 French election. I think a huge example for many, many European countries facing the same challenges. And then she, with a coalition, they managed to register abortion in the French constitution. Also very important. An example for the country I come from, Spain, and the country I live in, Austria. So that would be great. And finally, you're campaigning with My Voice, My Choice, and you have collected 1.2 million signatures for safe and accessible abortion in Europe. Mm-hmm. So this is just a glimpse of Sarah's work. So over to you. Maybe you want to introduce yourself in a more also holistic way, like 2 lines about you.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for this presentation. I think you've said it all, and I just maybe to add something that's important for me is that one of the practice that I'm inspired by, and that is like the philosophy of my work, is community organizing, which means that in everything I do, I put a lot of importance into centering people affected by issues they are working on, and also centering people and their relationship with one another, which led me to this work we're going to discuss today. I think that's very often when we talk about activism, we talk about, big stunt and demonstrations and all of this, can only work if we think about how we relate to each other. And so that's one of the things that I'm passionate about.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to read the book, Activism at All Costs. I know I had a hint that it would be related to my work, but it has so many overlaps. So yeah, really excited to talk about that. You bring in emotions, you bring in the critique of hyper-rationalization. You talk about healthy systems, about the relationships between people, power relationships. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like the work that we do at Great Evan, but then applied in the very specific context of activism. Mm-hmm. And I'm just excited because I think that's so relevant for the challenges that we are facing at the moment. Yeah. And how can we learn from that? So let's start with maybe linking it to your experience. So when did you first notice that activism itself could mirror the systems it seeks to dismantle?
Actually, I started to think about this and started to think about writing about it when I left Change.org, which is the petition platform I worked for more than 9 years. And so the reason why I was interested in that is that I started to think about the way, capitalist values or capitalist practices could show up in activist space. And especially when you work for a petition platform, that is a tech platform that is measuring the impact of campaigns based on the number of signatures, the number of shares, the growth of the platform, the number of users. I think I started to just, think about the way these measurements have a very big impact in the way we think about activism. And also how growth and hegemony was one of the things that I was seeing showing up not only at change.org, but in other organizations that were not tech organizations that I was working with. So that's kind of the entry point where I was like, oh, I would like to talk about how capitalism influenced the way we work. And I came across the work of Tema Okun, who is an American activist who has worked on what she calls the she doesn't call them the symptoms, but like the pieces. I call them symptoms in the book, but she calls them like different ways in which white supremacy shows up in the world and in our relationship. And she was mentioning, you know, like the worship of scale, the value of the written word versus the spoken word. She talks about the either or, you know, the binary that we can use, and how all of this has basically built a culture that is the white supremacy culture, where we create norms and then we differ between people who are valuable because they fit within that norm and people who are not, who can be disposable because they don't fit within that norm. And so all of this thinking, I was like, okay, actually it's not only about capitalism, capitalist culture, it's actually a culture of domination. Because then I started to make a link with, you know, like patriarchal structures and the way we overvalue, for example, the public space versus the private space, and, you know, how that impacts the way we think that activism always needs to be public and visible, especially with social media, when everything that's happening in the, you know, the backstory or everything that's happening that is not visible is not valued. So all of this made me think that actually we are, you know, as an activist society, we live within a society that itself is imposing some kind of norm, some kind of culture that I think are taken from those domination cultures. And so I wanted to really dig into that and try to name it in a very concrete way, how it shows up, but also to politicize it, because I think that we've talked a lot about the fact that being an activist can be tiring, can be difficult, and I wanted to politicize that, to say it's also the result of a culture and the result of a system. And so if we can question the way we do certain things, if we can politicize them, then maybe we can try and be part of an activist movement that use different norms and different culture.
Yes, thank you for that overview. Can you also describe a little bit more the symptom, like how is it like to be in an activist circle?
Mm-hmm.
In your context, for example, for those of us that don't have access or not that close?
So I think being an activist at the moment, especially with the rise of authoritarianism across the world, is being constantly on call, is being constantly worried, is also being emerged in a situation where you know that, or you feel that there will never be enough, that you need to constantly fight. You receive a lot of violence. And so sometimes, you know, all this sense of scarcity, of violence, you can reproduce in your activist space. So what is being an activist today is looking at the news, seeing some decisions made by policymakers or by political leaders or by companies, sometimes decisions that are extremely hurtful to the people, sometimes hurtful to the people you love, sometimes hurtful to the people that look like you, and feeling an urge and a responsibility to do something about it. And I think that, in my opinion, sometimes we have a vision of the activist only being, you know, the one on the, as I was saying, like, you know, doing the demonstration. I think all of us are activists in some way when we decide to take actions on things that feel not right to us. And just to give an idea, because you asked me what it is to be an activist, and I think that I could tell you about, you know, you go to meetings and you discuss with other activists about what should be done, and then you organize action, and then, you know, you do stuff online to try and bring attention to the issues, and you do some stuff in the street, and you go and try to pressure and negotiate political leaders. But really being an activist for me is more than, you know, like these known references for what is activist work. It's like the idea of you being active in trying to solve for the issues that are hurting you. And I'm saying that because at the moment in the US, what we are seeing, the deportation of so many people and the horrible kidnapping by ICE, for example, is met with resistance from people who are physically opposing those kidnapping, and this is being an activist as well. So I think that's just for us to open the conversation, like there's many ways actually to be active and to be an activist. But one thing that I explore in my book is how it is when we try to do that together. And because we are human beings and because we are trying to do things together, like when you meet with your need for action and the reality of doing stuff with others, with other people, what are the limits, what are the difficulties you can meet and how you can solve for this.
Loved this and loved the book, because one of the things that really gets me angry when I'm at conferences is that people say, get together and organize. That's what you can do at the moment. It's like, but you know how difficult that is. It's possible. There are many cases, there are good practices. You can learn a lot and do that. But, it's so challenging when you get together and try to do something together.
Yeah. And I think this thing of, don't, I think that's the say is like, don't agonize, organize. It's also an injunction. Yeah, it's like something you have to do, like you have to take care of your rubbish and you have to go to sleep early and you have to exercise and you have to eat well and you have to do so many things well in your life. So, when on top of that, someone say, and now organize, for me, it can be very, very difficult to manage, because this is the reason why I think like organizing is a practice that you can learn by talking about it. It's not something just you can do just simply, like it's something that you have to practice in order to do it well. And so I think one of the idea of this book, sometimes people say, because the book is talking about, how being in collective can be hurtful, etc. But I think it really talks about how to be organized, how to organize well. And I think it's both a book about, ethics and, the kind of world we want to build and the kind of activist society we want to build, but it's also how do we win? And I think that's sometimes also the issue, not only in activism, but we see self-care and we see health and we see like healthy relationship as a nice to have or as something moral to do. But I also think that it's something that is strategic. If we want to survive, if we want to actually have impact, we need to be considering like how our relationship either support or weakens our activist work.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, because I don't know, there's also a sort of an assumption that, it's like we do the same thing and then we just need more rest. Or and it's like, that's not what you talk about. It's like we have to change the structures, the basis on which we build our actions so that rest has an integral role to play. But it's not, we do the same thing and then we rest. Exactly. Right? And like, I need to have better boundaries, better limits with people, and then that will solve it.
Yeah. And this is interesting, just going back, because, making the link with capitalist model, or like one of the things that very, neoliberal and individualistic society has taught us is that we are responsible for everything that happens to us. So if you're an activist and you're tired, that's your responsibility. It's because you don't rest, or it's because you care too much, or because, there's so many ways to make this an individual's problem. Actually, it is not an individual's problem. It's a question of structure. It's a question of how a group is designed, who's doing what, how do you define your goals? Are your goals achievable with the amount of resources that you have today? Are you the right person to do that? Who should you work with to be able to do that? All these questions are organizing questions, and if you think about it, they are the only way to be healthy. But I don't want to diminish what I'm really trying to do in the book is that I got a bit frustrated of conversation that were like, oh no, it's only systemic, it's systemic, there's nothing we can do, this person is behaving in a bad way, but it's systemic. And on the other side, you have this kind of very individual, the problem is this person is not a great person, when actually this person is, existing within a group of people, within a society, within a system that also brings them to behave in a certain way. And so with the book, I really wanted to reconcile both and say that, of course, there are system and there are structure, and this is what we have control over, but there is also how we show up as individuals with our history, with our background, with our trauma, and with everything that we bring with us just as a human being when we come into a group, that challenge also those structures. So those structures should be made also to incorporate the reality of an individual when they want to join a group and they come with a lot of baggage. So for me, I think it's really important if we want to talk about burnout, and not only in activism, that we reconcile the individuals and the collective, the emotional and the structural, and that all, both sides need to be taken into account for us to find solutions that work.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point that we've often thought about, like how you move away from the powerlessness, sort of like it's a structural problem, and I think that's, at least, I don't know, it frees me up a little bit. It's like, oh, okay, it's not my fault, or it's not that I'm not doing enough. It's the structures. But then also, like, how can I change the like meso structures, like how we organize so that we can fight the system? I think that your book gives me a lot of hope in that you give a lot of cues and ideas of things that have been, maybe we can talk about it a bit more later, things that are research and we just don't apply for various reasons, right? So I find that really interesting. I still first wanted to, there's a very nice quote in your book from Satish Kumar, because we're talking about like, what is it to be an activist? Like, what does it mean? So I just wanted to bring it on, and maybe you can comment on it. My translation of it, because the book in French is like, activism is something to offer, not something to achieve. What does that quote mean to you?
So I use that quote because there's one in this chapter of the book that talks about one of this culture that is coming from capitalist society and also from the patriarchal one and the white supremacist one, is this idea of transaction, that we will overvalue transaction over relation. How does that show up in activism? We care more about what we can get people to do than what we can help people achieve personally or like develop, or we care more about what they will produce than what they will for example, their own sense of empowerment or autonomy, etc. So the reason why I use this quote, because I think it says it all. It's a gift for people. I think for all of us, it's a gift to be able to understand your power. It's a gift to be able to understand how your relationship with others puts you in a position to have a say in the future of your kids and in your own future. And so I think that these quotes explain how it's not only about the end goal, it's about the process, and it's about everything that can happen between the moment someone, push the door to like start and engage and the moment where you win the campaign. All of this process is, even for me, more important than the end goal. And sometimes the process can be very successful and can really build people's power, even though they don't win the exact campaign they were working on. And so I take the example of the Yellow Vest movement in France because I think it's an interesting one. The movement grew very big. It started with fuel prices, but then it grew much bigger with much larger requests. And all of these requests have not been met with political decisions. And so sometimes we portray this movement, it hasn't worked, it hasn't made any effect. And I think it's a very short-sighted way to see this movement, because the sociology of this movement teaches us that actually a lot of the people who came to this movement had never been engaged politically before. For many of them, that was the first demonstration. But we also forget to tell about the camaraderie and the link and the solidarity that has been built between the people who came there. Some of them living, very close to each other, but never talking to each other, and who really have built bond and have built solidarity. I think that you were like, what would be a culture that is not a culture that is, a dominant culture, and I think would be a culture where the relationship is more important and where the relationship builds this kind of power and not just, as you were quoting, like just something that we need to achieve.
Can you maybe give us an overview of some of those elements we've been talking about? So on the one hand, all elements of, you started, for example, talking about, so it came from the white supremacy. So your question came from capitalism. And then it was like, okay, that's actually white supremacy. And then it's like, it's patriarchy. And then on the other side, there's the vision, right? So there's the healthy systems that we talk about. Can you maybe give us an overview of a few, maybe, of the topics or like anchor points or elements, call them, and whatever way you prefer, about like what is in place that is problematic about how we organize in circles.
So yeah, and so I wanted this book, and I wanted this reflection to be very practical for people to be able to use it. So of course now I'm using the big words, and it seems very conceptual, but the book is actually organized around, those symptoms, like the symptoms of this culture that we see every day in activism. So one of them is the worship of scale and the quest for hegemony. I think that's something that I mostly seen in my work at Change, but also as I was telling you around me, which is that many organizations will pay more attention and will invest more resources into growing, into becoming the first one and like the most representative and the one with the most member, instead of thinking about, okay, like what is the goal, what do we want to achieve, and is it more efficient to be like the biggest, or is it more efficient to work with so many other partners that can take in charge other pieces of the work that we don't have the resources. So, like for me, being able to, divorce yourself from the capitalist model in activism is to say, maybe we don't have to be the biggest one. Maybe we can be the best partner. Maybe we can be such a good person in coalition building that everyone wants to work with us. And so you can build much more power. Another example of these, symptoms that we see and that we can challenge, as I was saying, is this idea of, I'm just going to try and take an example of the binary. I think that what I call binary, is the either or. It's you're with me or against me. It's like, it's a victory or it's not. It is good or is it bad? This person is with me. This person is against me. This person is pure. This person is not pure. And I think like this binary we see a lot in activism. Why? Because it's been super effective. It's so easy to find like the other one, to define another one, to mobilize people against another one. It's much easier to call people to, mobilize on one single issue with no complexity. And with one single ask, than it is to say, okay, we actually need to take into account all of these things. It's much easier to say, we want everything, than to say, well, we want a little bit and there's more work to do. And so this binary shows up as, a maximalist approach of activism. It shows up also with some kind of purity, where we're going to look for like the perfect activist, the one that never says anything bad, the one that is never making any mistake, but also like where we're looking much more for, we're looking for opponents, we're not looking for partners. So I think all of this showing up in activism is also deeply entrenched in a white supremacy culture that itself has been built on the idea of a binary. Like all of us know that race is a social construct, and that are you white or are you black? I was in South Africa recently and I was reading about during the apartheid, there are some group of people who went from white to black or from black to white, just to give this example. So the idea of binary and norm has been in society created to be able to have a group overpowering another one. And it's true also in patriarchy, And so I think that it's really interesting to question how, when we do activism, we reproduce that binary for strategic or tactic reason, and to question it, especially in the era of rising fascism. I think it is one of the way in which this culture is showing up. Maybe one last one that I find interesting is, and that we didn't mention yet, is the question of the emotion versus the reason. So in politics, we talk a lot about, how you need to be pragmatic and how you need to have the data and how you need to speak in a certain way to be seen as someone that is, is a good political partner. The reality is that emotions are at the center of political engagement, and emotions and experience are also at the center of building policies and political engagement. And I think especially on the progressive left, we have difficulty to welcome the idea that maybe it's not enough to have a report and to show it to people. Maybe we need to connect with their emotion. Maybe we connect with their experience in order to, being able to be in a conversation with them. So those are just some of the symptoms and some of the ways in which they are entrenched in our culture. And in the emotion versus reasons, in the patriarchal culture, it's also been built that there were people who think and people who feel, and that the one who feel have less importance, and should have less power, especially in that case would be women or people of color, for example. So I think it's important to understand that these are very real, concrete stuff that happen in our activist world, but they are deeply rooted in historical and cultural narrative and practices that we must let go of. I really think we have to do this work if we want to be able to win.
Yeah, it's a bit different, but it also connects to the emotions. I find super interesting when you talk about this work around narratives that you have been doing and how it would be important that we speak more to the emotion, but also this just means what does it mean to engage for, let's say, a left oriented program that just means better air, better food, a good life for our kids and future generations. And this doesn't sound smart, right? And it's like we have to make it complicated, and then it comes hyper intellectualization, and there's this critique as well from there's these like elites, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's an heritage from, you know, like the philosophical thinkers, you know, when they started to say, you know, there's the reason and there's the emotion. And so I think that, you know, coming from there, there's been this idea that you know, like only people who think pragmatically are real thinkers. And actually, there's a book that is called The Mistake of Descartes. Descartes, who was one of these philosophers, who says, like, you know, Descartes has said, you know, like the only place in your, you know, the only thing that matters in making a decision, you know, is like your computation, you know, the way you think. And so this book explained basically that you take wrong decisions when you're not connected to your emotion. Like you don't take good decisions when the half of your brain that is connected to your experience that generates emotion is not able to interact in the decision-making process. And so I think that because we inherit from this, that also stops us, especially on the left, to question the fact that talking with people about the emotion or their experience is not manipulation. It's actually real political work. And I believe that there is a little bit of elitism sometimes that, you know, if it's not written in a book or if it's not like with a theory, and if you don't have a 156 pages report with like very complicated number, what you're saying doesn't have the same value. So I don't want to do anti-intellectualism, because I think like we need ideas and we need research and we need data to be able to make good decisions. And, you know, but when it comes to convincing people, when it comes to helping them, you know, project themselves as a group, you know, you need to go beyond that. And that's also like one of the things we can do, in my opinion, to make activism a bit more inclusive, is to start from how we all, actually, we're not different from everyone else, like how we all function. I have certain opinions about certain things that are related to my history and the experiences that I've had. Maybe you will have different ones because you had different experiences. And if we don't understand that, if we don't understand the experience and emotions, then we can't do the political work. So that's one of the things I think as well we have to.
Yeah, you were hinting to it now. Can you get a little bit more into what can we do?
Yeah.
In collectives to ground ourselves more in emotion, to invite it more?
So the first thing I think to be able to have emotions in our political work, to convince people, is to be able to welcome them in our groups. So one of the things that I talk about in the book is the ability to build groups while centering the connection and the experience and the emotional connection as a centerpiece in building healthy groups. So I take an example that is really amazing. It's a feminist organization in France that is called La Lab. So it's a feminist organization that defends the rights of Muslim women, and it's made only of Muslim women. And the way this group has imagined their onboarding for people who come into the organization is very much to say that you can't just have someone who joins with all the baggage and trauma that maybe they face, because a lot of the women who came in the association, they suffered a lot of Islamophobia and sexism. And so you can't just, welcome them and straight away send them on a TV show to receive like so much hate and, like horrible questions, etc. And so the first step in building a group that can actually have a political voice is to create a safe, or at least a safer space where they can meet each other, when they can share their experiences, find ways basically to build trust with one another, and also to build trust in themselves and their ability to be politically vocal before they actually go out in the world. I think, I give this example because it's very obvious that the amount of violence that suffer those women is like, you understand, but I would say it should be done in any cases. I've been in so many activist groups when you arrive and you're charged with I don't know, so many difficult stuff you've been through your life, and the meeting starts and no one asks how you're doing, and straight away you go into like, okay, we have to do this and we have to do that. But also like I don't know, I give the example in the book, like I was in this demonstration and I was, we were opposing the presence of the extreme right in a demonstration against anti-Semitism. And there's this guy who was with the extreme right and came to me and like, insulted me and pushed me. And, no one in my group, like there was so much confusion, people didn't see what happened. And so after the day finished, everyone came home and we had no moment to, join and, kind of leave this moment and the emotion maybe it had triggered. And so everyone came home and then there was this WhatsApp group and it was like, oh, that was amazing. Yeah, we did this so great. And I was feeling very stressed and traumatized and I didn't want to waste the party. And so all of this negative emotion created something in me that I felt also left by my group. And I was like, oh, no one cares, whatever. So I think that in order to welcome these emotions, we need to make space for it. So it can't just show up spontaneously if it's not welcome in a structured way. And so one of the way we invite emotion, and I know, that's probably what some of what you do but you have to build, that's why I'm talking about structure. You have to build the spaces for this emotion to be not only heard, but welcome and sometimes used for political work. And going from the intimate to the political is also a way for many of us, and I include myself, to make trauma become like political action. I think that's super important, that we understand that many of us come to activism because we need to repair. And so if there's no space in the activist group to, voice the reparation that's needed and to put it into action to be a real reparation, then it's too difficult.
Two things. I want to go in there in a moment, but there was a nice anecdote that, because I have the luck, I'm lucky that we work together in one. And so we were having this session in Marseille and we were doing one of these exercises about like personal stories and your values and why are you doing this activist work. And I remember this was very important to you. And then there's one of the participants said like, I don't understand, like, why are we doing this? They are, the far right, they are super organizing themselves and they are, destroying everything. And here we are talking about our emotions. Oh, and then another participant answered, but it was a sort of like a life lesson. And he said, that's not what we're doing here. Is not what the traditional left is doing, which was the critique of the other person. This is something new. We're trying to do things in a different way. And this is so important. And this is actually the work that we have to do. And yeah, I was very impressed.
Yeah, I was glad that this person answered that I didn't have to defend the proposition. But yeah, it's super important. And I think that it's interesting because with the rise of the far right, I think everyone feels like, we need to fight back and we need to be there and we need not to lose time. And it's true, like there are urgencies, that we need to take care of. But also like the best thing we can do is to become more, to build our solidarity and to build our strength together. Because honestly, the only thing that can, sorry, I hope it doesn't feel too much like Star Wars, but like the only thing that can defeat the far right is this ideology. I mean, what the far right is rising on is a sense of hopelessness, cynicism, and loneliness. And so in the way we do activism, we can't have activist group that are trying to fight extreme right with the exact same ingredients. Like what we need is to have this solidarity, this sense of community, this sense of strength. And also, I think it depends, but, we are in France, I'm working in France mostly, and, we still can demonstrate, even though it's becoming more violent, and, we still have some kind of freedom of speech. But there are places, like in other places in the world, and I work, for example, with people in Georgia that, cannot even demonstrate anymore, and like their lives are at risk. And because they've built this solidarity, they also are able to use that fuel to find ways to protect each other, like physically. So we should never forget that everything we build now is also like for the future. And as this fascism grows, like the best thing we can do is to actually make sure that we are together and that we trust each other enough that we can support each other. You know what I mean? But I remember this moment and I was so not surprised that this question came up.
Yeah.
And it's the real tension, I think, that a lot of activists feel.
Yeah. In your book, you also talk about this sense of urgency and how that's preventing us from actually doing the important work.
Yeah.
I wanted to get into the point of trauma and healing in the collective. Because that's, I think, one of the most amazing things that I have found, and you talk about it, just makes so much sense. You're traumatized in relationship. So you heal it also in relationship, in part. One of the things that we've been wondering, and I don't know, I have some colleagues that are more like experts, let's say trauma informed. Where is the boundary? Because we say, in our case, our context is work. So alternative organizing for, let's say, alternative work. And there's something we say, okay, like work is also, it's not therapy, kind of. But we don't know exactly. Where is that? I don't know if you can talk a little bit about, is there a boundary, or where is it in your case in activism? Because I think that goes a level deeper. But yeah, curious to know your take on that.
Yeah. So I'm very torn with this question, because I think the boundary shouldn't be defined by the space, but by the people. So I think for me, the question is like the boundary is more like the boundary that each individual in the group wants to put in the kind of opening up in how they feel and some personal issues and traumas, than it is the space. Because I mean, I think that we are in a society where we're really struggling with emotions. We talked about it already, and we're really struggling with people who are not well. How often do you say, "Hey, how are you?" "Oh yeah, I'm great," even though like you're doing so bad. So I think it's just like I believe that we would win to have more spaces where we actually can say how we are feeling. I think work is where people spend a lot of their time. So for me, the boundary is more like where people put it than the space. I think actually work can be a healing space when you find, coworkers with who you build trust. There's always the issue with hierarchy, because we're still like in a model where in most organizations there's hierarchy, and so, someone has power over you, and so how much can you open up? But I would say that one of the things that I've been advising to a lot of the people that I've been talking to who do management or leadership, or who are in leadership position, is that the best thing they can do to allow their, the people they work with to actually be healthy is themselves to be a little bit more vulnerable and to open up a little bit more about, I'm not even talking about personal stuff, but just opening up about the difficulties you face at work. And, when sometimes things are hard or you are not motivated to work on something, etc. Because I really think that this model of like the, powerhouse and everything will be okay, and you do that 8 hours a day and then you come home and you crash, is just not sustainable for anyone. So I would, just to answer your question, I would say I think the boundary is individual, is not so much in the space. And I actually think that what we do in activism can absolutely work for workspaces. It's just that the entry point is different, because I think people in activism, all of us come because, there's something that's accepted, that you come to activism because you're passionate about something. So your emotion already can be a little bit more welcomed. But yeah, I actually, some of the support that I give to organizations, like, okay, there are organizations working on social issues, but they're still organizations. They are still like, employers, employees, and managers and managees. And so we're still working this out. So I don't see how this wouldn't work in other type of organization. So yeah, I'm all for trying to open up a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very insightful. I wanted to touch upon, like, now focus a little bit more on the vision and possibilities. And there's a concept you bring into the book, which is based on Edouard Glissant, the idea of archipelagos. Sort of these like plural interconnected islands. There's other metaphors for it from other authors. But how can this inspire a different way of organizing movements? To maybe draw of some of the big examples that you've lived recently.
Yeah. So, it's to answer the question of hegemony and scale. I think that the opposite model of hegemony is collaboration. In my case, I even talk about coalition. And I make a difference between collaboration is like we work together and, we have to share the work. I think coalition is more like we share a goal together and we think about ways in which we can manage each of us a bit of the work. So I think the reason why I wanted to push this is that for two reasons. The first is that we are, as I said already, like we are in a moment of rising fascism. And so the most resistant ways of organizing is decentralization. And so the more you have multiple actors that are connected to each other, the less risk you have for organization to be targeted and also of the movement to be weakened. Like if there is one organization that's targeted, everyone else is still there. So that's the first reason. The second is that with that also comes a lack of resources. So we have less and less funding. Some organizations in the civic space, they work with public funding that are being cut. Now we know that with USA, that's been withdrawn by Trump, or even like, you know, big movements, big foundations that have stopped funding in Europe, for example. Like, I'm European, so I speak from that perspective, to fund more in the US or in other parts of the world. Like, and also like the ones who are, you know, trying to get funding from people, you know, people are also like suffering the economic crisis. So anyway, there's less resources. Working as a archipelagos, I don't know how you say in English, archipel. So this idea of, you know, many islands that are connected, because the archipel is not just one island. An archipel is like a group of many islands. So like there's a connection, you know, like there's a shared water space. And in this idea of doing that with the organization is also this idea that we are many people, but we are connected with a common purpose. And because we have less resources, we need to think about how we use them. And so if we all are doing the same thing, if we all are raising money on the same thing, we're actually like making ourselves poorer. We are increasing competition. And so I'm really pushing the idea of when you start an organization, or even when you try to refocus your organization, like which part of the football team am I in? You know, which player am I playing? And so I give the example, I'm sorry, I'm not even sure if that example I give in the book, but I will say it anyway. The example of like, when we work on the last election in France, in 2024, we had a snap election, so we had only 3 weeks to organize. You know, it's been beautiful to see how a lot of us, you know, we were a group of 130 organizers. It was so fast that we didn't have time to decide who was going to be the leader. It's like everyone's putting stuff together. And so everyone was doing different things, and everyone was sharing with others, you know, like the resources they have, whether it was data or intelligence or, you know, training each other, or, you know, someone needs a room to make an event. I have a room. Someone needs this, you know. And so this idea of being more as an archipel, like as a group of different organizations that share a water space and share resources and are not competing for the same resources, made it the only way, actually, I think we could have won. And so I think it worked because it was an urgency moment, but I'm really pushing for us to think about how do we do that when it's not urgent? You know, how do we, and I'm thinking a lot about that as I start, you know, new projects. Every time I'm like, okay, who's doing that already? And sometimes it's a bit tiring because you just want to go with your idea. But spending time to explore, you know, like who else is doing that and discussing with other people also allows you to really like fill the gap, but also build partnerships already with other people. And I think that's the way we should all view our organizations, and be able to like think a little bit more like as an archipel instead of a lone island.
Was this archipelago from the 2024 elections? Like, was it based on any structure, or was it mostly relationships that you've been building?
Yeah, it was relationships. So, you know, we are going back to this point, is that the reason why we were able to act together with trust is that we knew each other already for some time. And it's, you know, it's not like we've been working for 1 year and suddenly we trust each other and then this thing happened. It's just like there has been many moments in the past 10 years, I would say, that people in this, you know, who participated in this kind of fast coalition were in contact at some point doing stuff together. And one thing that's interesting is they were not in contact as like formal partnership, like they were individuals knowing each other. And so when we decided to set up this group, we didn't say, we want this organization and this organization. We say, oh, we want this person to be there and this person should be there. Or we should say to this person, she can join the group. And because we were individuals also working in groups, like it was much faster, and the trust had been built between those people before, so they were able to act quickly together.
Yeah, I guess that's also one of the, or from what I hear, critiques to, let's say, the left or like non-right, that you know, we're disconnected from each other. That we need to make a lot more of this work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to finalize, I wanted to ask you, because in your book, again, so you talk about, so we should not focus on what is that we don't want. Let's focus on what is it that we want. And so I wanted to ask you, can you describe, or also like what headline would you give? Is it like healthy activism, or like what is like, say, your main attribute to it, and how does it look like? Can you give us a bit of a picture, a metaphor, or whatever you like?
I had done this exercise for another interview and I should have written it down because now I need to rework it. But I think like the kind of activism that I hope I can help contribute to build is one where we find community, one where we find support, even like I would say one where we find the trust in ourselves, the ability to trust ourselves and each other. It's one that is very determined to win and still conscious of the world we live in. So very pragmatic yet with a big vision. It's also a place where we understand that everything we do, the way we act to each other, has an impact on our political project, and therefore we put a lot of effort in the way we are with each other. Yeah, and it's an activist space where there is conflict, but there isn't violence. And it's a space where we are looking to make each other's better, but we are not looking to punish each other. Sorry, I had to do a little bit of negative.
Okay. Helps us think.
Yeah. And I think very inspired by the idea of in sociocratic models where you're not, like you have an objection and the if someone proposes something and you say, I have an objection because this is going to be problematic, like the role of the group is not to fight the dissensus, but is to try to find a solution to lift that objection. So I want activism that is inspired by those practices of trying to find solutions together.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And congratulations on the book. I think you did an amazing, very challenging work to bring down like all of these like philosophical perspectives down to something also very pragmatic and specific about how people, can take the book and start changing how they meet to be able to get closer to a healthy activism that supports them as well as individuals and as a system.
Thank you. And thank you for reading.
This is political. How we organize is political. And I thought that it's become clearer to you through this episode with Sarah, how important it is to challenge the basis of the dominating cultures that we find ourselves in. Because if we don't do that, we're reproducing those cultures and we're just reproducing more inequality and unfairness. So whatever it is that we engage in doing, there's the need to look inside, of course, individually, but also, and especially for the focus of the work that we do in this intersection between the individual and then the collective. How is it that we engage together for our common purposes and goals? And how from here we create new cultures, healthier ones, that then allow us to get to a healthier, better world as well. And what I take with me is the power of vision from her book. It came through, I think, a little bit in the discussion, but she talks a lot about it in her book, about from even a very practical perspective, how important it is to, when we engage with people, when we have conversations, and we disagree, and there are people from, let's say, the opposite direction to what we would want towards a more progressive world, that, let's not engage in criticizing what the other person is saying or in acting in opposition, but let's just try to picture what is it that we want to achieve. And it would be much easier to understand each other from that perspective. And also the power of vision is what allows us to then move forward towards something and not move up against something else. I didn't understand this for a very long time. And I started, working with vision at a personal level the last couple of years and seeing how powerful it is and how much it just allows me to, for example, just in my relationship, if I imagine, so I'm pissed off because of something, and I imagine, okay, I use that emotion to help me connect to what is it that I would want to achieve? How would I see how do I feel the potential of the relationship with my partner? And that is such a pulling force that then I'm able to go through those feelings or understand, okay, I was angry because of something, but what is it that I actually want? And then talk about that thing that I want. And for example, my partner responding much, much better to that. And both of us moving forward to the potential that we see in our relationship. And this is a very simple and a sort of also silly example, but from this embodied experience with my partner, I've been doing this more and more also my understanding of the collective in this case. Like, what is it that we could be? What is the potential? And moving more towards that vision and the energy that gives. And I think that from there, we can understand each other much, much better and collaborate with each other. It's not even in a smoother way. It's just in a way that makes sense. So yeah, that's one of the big things that I take for myself. Do check out her book if you speak French. And if not, we hope for an English version soon. I think, as I've said for the interview, and I think in the intro, she does bridge very, very well these huge systemic topics with very specific actions that we can take, and why those actions that sometimes we don't know why. You might don't know if you're facilitating a group why you're doing them, or I haven't always known as well. Or sometimes I feel insecure when I'm in a group, but this helps me also ground. Why is it so important to ask people how they're doing? What is it that we want to do together? What are our needs? Knowledge, what I feel that, that they are if they express pain. Stay there. Yeah, this is the work. Oh, this is some of my takeaways. And again, organizing is political. Always.